are these people?
Supreme Court is hearing oral statements regarding student loan debt forgiveness starting today. That probably will make a decision. I'm hearing probably by late June.
Okay.
So we're gonna once again kind of do a Frankenstein of a segment in using a couple of articles. Well, one fully and then one slightly. But then we also have some video clips to kind of talk a little bit more about the implications as to how student loan debt forgiveness was constructed and, what people have not been saying in terms of student loan debt and what is missing from the discussion that certain progressives have said that I don't think has been talked about up till now,
Okay.
as I said earlier. But this article is from Common Dreams, written by Kenny Stancil. And he writes, groups warn of financial disaster for millions if Supreme Court kills student debt relief. If the Supreme Court sides with the extremist judges, millions of Americans' monthly costs will rise significantly when student loan payments resume later this year, says a report commissioned by Senator Elizabeth Warren. So Kenny continues, can you please zoom out? Thank you. Striking down President Joe Biden's student debt relief would have devastating impacts on millions of borrowers, advocacy groups warned in a report released Monday, one day before the U.S. Supreme Court is set to hear oral arguments over the White House cancellation bid. Denying student debt cancellation would cause financial disaster for millions of Americans, says the report, which was assembled after Senator Elizabeth Warren asked the Debt Collective, NAACP, and more than a dozen other organizations last month to explain how upholding or rejecting Biden's plan would affect borrowers. Reducing debt burden through cancellation will help avoid defaults when student loan payments resume and ensure borrowers do not face financial ruin as the economy continues its recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the report, which was provided exclusively to Insider. This would disproportionately benefit low-income households. However, if the Supreme Court sides with the extremist judges, millions of Americans' monthly costs will rise significantly when student loan payments resume later this year, the report cautions. I'm putting all of my hope into this process finally getting approval. I haven't allowed myself to imagine another scenario because I may not continue even trying to exist every day if that happens. I believe that was a quote. Again, just given, I think there was a quote from Twitter. I believe that's someone said, I believe.
Okay.
Although Biden ignored progressives' demands for universal student debt cancellation, his administration in August announced several relief measures, including a move to wipe up to $10,000 in debt for federal borrowers with individual incomes under $125,000 and up to $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients, as well as proposed changes to the income-driven repayment program. Republican lawmakers and right-wing activists responded with a barrage of lawsuits. Applications for relief opened in October but closed a month later after a federal judge appointed by former President Donald Trump blocked Biden's plan, deeming it unlawful on legal grounds criticized by experts as dubious. At the time, 26 million borrowers had already applied or were automatically eligible for relief, and 16 million applications were fully approved and sent to loan servicers. With his relief initiative on hold, Biden extended the moratorium on the federal student loan repayments, a policy that was first implemented at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020 and had been set to expire on December 31st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. Payments are set to resume 60 days after that date or 60 days after the Supreme Court hands down its decision, whichever comes first. The nation's chief judicial body agreed in December to hear oral arguments in 2 student loan-related cases yesterday. In both Biden versus Nebraska, brought by the GOP-led states of Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, and South Carolina, and Department of Education versus Brown, brought by 2 plaintiffs who claimed they were unfairly excluded from relief, remember that, the right-wing dominated High Court will decide whether Biden's plan exceeds the U.S. Department of Education's authority and whether the lawsuits have legal standing.
I can zoom
You have
this.
to zoom in. Yeah, please. As Time explains, 6 Republican-led states filed Biden versus Nebraska, arguing that in addition to the administration overreach, the program would cause states to lose tax revenue as a result of debt cancellation. U.S. District Judge Henry Autry initially dismissed the case, saying it lacked legal standing. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, however, later decided that Missouri had legal standing because a loan servicer in the state would lose substantial revenue. Oh boy. Really?
Oh, yep.
That's all it was. Like a loan
They'd
servicer
lose
would be out of
money.
business. Oh, who cares? Anyway, Department of Education versus Brown was filed by Alexander Taylor and Mira Brown. Brown is not eligible for any relief because I believe he made over the $125,000 cutoff. And Taylor is only eligible for $10,000 rather than up to $20,000 given to Pell Grant recipients. They also argued that the administration did not go through the Administration Procedure Act's notice and comment procedure, which requires agencies to notify the public of their proposal and take comments. Biden's student loan forgiveness plan is contingent on the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act of 2003, which allows the Department of Education to modify student financial assistance programs in response to national emergencies to alleviate borrowers' financial hardship. Former President Donald Trump used the act for the student loan moratorium, which began during the pandemic and is still in place for the next few months. Programs implemented under the HEROES Act are exempt from the notice and comment period, but plaintiffs in the Department of Education versus Brown case say that the Education Department does not have the authority to act under this law.
Okay.
So zoom out. So any thoughts, Reef?
No, I mean, they've got, you know, they don't want to lose the insurance / loan companies, right? Like, no, at least they're saying that's what it is. You know, at least they're being somewhat like honest about that, right? Like, so, but yeah, no, I mean, it's standard Democratic, like, and we're gonna get lip service from quote unquote progressives now, right?
Well, actually, not somewhat, but this is an old clip. So this was done, I believe, in I want to say in January 2021.
Okay.
So actually, if you just pause it for a second,
Yep, I got you.
we're not gonna watch the whole thing, but basically, this was when Biden just got into office, and they were making this push, you know, for student debt relief. So this is Ilhan Omar speaking, and I want you to notice what she says here that I think is very important, because I think, and again, we've talked about student loan debt forgiveness before, but after watching this, she says something very interesting that I'm actually going to bring up later in terms of, you know, Brianna Jory Gray's interview with Jed Sugarman on Bad Faith. That I don't think to this point, I don't think anyone has kind of caught, that I do want to highlight a little bit. So let's see what she says.
We can choose to lift the burden of millions of people face. We can actually invest in the future of the American people. Today, we are taking a needed action to tackle the student loan debt crisis by using executive authority under the Higher Education Act to cancel up to $50,000 in student debt for federal loan borrowers. This is an important first step, but we can and must go bolder. We cannot be too bold in responding to the pandemic and providing needed help to the American people. I have been encouraged by the steps President Biden has taken to tackle the student debt crisis and hope he uses his executive authority to move towards full student debt cancellation. The American people are counting on us to meet this moment and implement meaningful change. I promise I will not stop fighting until we have ended the student loan debt crisis and cancel student debt for everyone in America. And I am so glad to be in this fight with my colleagues.
So, two things that she said. So, the first thing I think we've talked about before is that so there was a memo that Elizabeth Warren, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley, and I think a couple other people sent to the president when he got sworn in. It was sometime after, to use the Higher Education Act as the basis to relieve student debt. So already talked about that. Actually, we'll reference that in a minute. But notice what she said. You know, she said it's the first step, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
She said, and this was what Elizabeth Warren was pushing, up to 50,000 K.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so my thing is too, and I've said this before. If she really wanted to be so, like, this is why I don't trust, and like this is kind of like the shadiness of Elizabeth Warren that like I don't particularly enjoy about her. Like, if she really wanted to be somewhat more progressive, I would think that she should have pushed for at least, 50K.
Yeah.
Meaning keep like the bottom should be 50K and then
Right.
go from there. But instead, she capped it up to 50K as the cutoff point.
Mm-hmm.
So it really wasn't. So yeah, it was better. Yes, you can argue, but again, in life, what Ilhan was saying is like, this is just the first step. And then she continued to say, we want full cancellation. So then if she said this back then, and I have to wonder, okay, so let's say Biden, went through this and got, went with the 50K. What would have been the next step? I would figure it would have been easier if you just said cancel it all and then go from there, instead of being like, oh, we're going to go up to 50,000 K and then we're going to continue to work harder to make sure people get full, full student loan debt forgiveness. That to me doesn't make much sense.
No.
So, yeah, so it just kind of, yeah, so really that's just a platitude, but I think just kind of hiding behind the fact of, then we're going to do anything more besides that. And so even with that is the idea of like, okay, well, where's the fight now?
Yeah.
Yeah, they, I saw some progressives outside the Supreme Court. I think I saw Maxwell Frost and I think a few other Congress people, outside yesterday during the rally. But again, it was like, where was this fight since 2021, for pushing for at least 50,000? And then like, and also what were those next steps? Like, we don't know that. So yeah, so again, I just wanted to kind of mention that because I think that's something that people miss, because the argument she's making is we're going to continue fighting like to push for full. So if you're going to do that, why not just go for the full right from the jump and then go from there?
Right.
So, anything you want to add to that?
Nope. Just kind of standard gaslighting, lip servicey stuff on means tested nonsense,
Right.
That should be barely a crumb that they're supposed to fight for more parts of that piece of bread, that they're not going to,
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, it was just funny. Like I caught that, when I was doing the research on this, I was just kind of like, wait, like they were going to, like the implication is they were going to continue fighting. So where's been the fight since? But so that aside, so along with them saying that's the first step of how many, who knows, within the memo that was sent out by Warren, she said to use the Higher Education Act instead of the HEROES Act, which we read in Kenny's article, that Biden used as the anchor to forgive student loan debt. So this, I'm not going to read the whole thing for this, but this was from the Business Insider, and it was written, if you tune to the left, because I forgot this journalist's name, written by, I didn't put it down, but I did put it in the description, so I'm sorry I can't give you credit, but I did give you credit in the description.
Here, I can look for a second.
So it's in the description. So, but not too important because I'm not only going to read these few paragraphs. But
Olay Sheffrey.
Thank you. So if you zoom in for me, please.
Yep.
So she writes the Higher Education Act as an alternative. Some Democratic lawmakers and experts argued that the authority to cancel student debt has always existed under the Higher Education Act. Under the Act's compromise and settlement authority, it states that the Education Department can enforce, pay, compromise, waive, or release any right, title, claim, lien, or demand related to federal student debt. In February 2021, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Warren, and Presley led a group of Democratic colleagues in introducing a resolution outlining a plan for Biden to cancel student debt using the Higher Education Act, which does not require a connection to a national emergency. See, and those of you might remember back, I think it was in October, when Mike Federetto blocked me and Sabby regarding this, because he mentioned that, Trump's federal judge blocked it, not saying that, Biden used the HEROES Act instead of the Higher Education Act, which was the stronger basis to cancel student loan debt. And actually, it would have helped to give more universal debt. And then we went in that tiff and he blocked me for that. I think he did actually go back and made a video correcting that, but didn't credit me and Sabby for kind of calling that out before he blocked us.
Right.
But anyway, the article continues. President Biden has the legal authority to cancel billions in student debt with a stroke of a pen, and he must meet the moment by using that authority, which will not only set us on a path to an equitable recovery, but will also help reduce the racial wealth gap, Presley said at the time. Legal experts have also voiced support for the Higher Education Act. In September 2020, the Legal Services Center of Harvard Law School wrote a memo for Warren outlining why the act gives the Education Secretary authority to cancel student debt broadly. The memo said that the Secretary has the authority to modify a loan to zero and exercises this authority even in the absence of implementing regulations. The Education Department did not immediately to respond to Insider's request for comment on whether it's considering pursuing alternative routes to debt relief, including the Higher Education Act. Very interesting that then, they're basically going all in on the HEROES Act, which, as we mentioned, is problematic given Biden recently has said, the pandemic is basically over. I think this was back in November. And now the national emergency regarding COVID is going to expire in the middle of May. And as I said, I think the Supreme Court is due to make a decision regarding this case in late June. So by then, it's kind of like, okay, we're not in an state of emergency anymore. So why did you tie this to the HEROES Act?
Yeah.
So made that case before. So but again, I mentioned this before. But I did also want to play this clip that I saw on Twitter. Hold on one second if you go back.
Yeah. Here. You need?
Oh, no, actually, there's more to it. So, no, actually, I thought the clip was coming up, so not yet. So going back to Kenny, an unarmed White House official previously told Time that our debt relief is needed to prevent defaults and delinquencies as student borrowers transition back to repayment after the end of the payment pause. There was a national emergency that impacted millions of student borrowers, said the official. Many of those borrowers still face risk of default on their student loans due to that emergency. Congress gave the Secretary of Education the authority under the HEROES Act to take steps to prevent that harm, and he is. Those who responded to Warren's inquiry echoed the Biden administration warnings about the harmful economic consequences of a ruling against student debt relief, which will likely come in late June or early July. One member of the debt collectors said, "I am putting all my hope in this process finally getting approval. I haven't allowed myself to imagine another scenario because I may not continue even trying to exist every day if that happens. This debt follows me daily." So remember those, yeah, so here we go. So here's a video. So remember those two people who basically are suing because they essentially did not qualify. One of them didn't qualify because he made too much money. I believe Myra Brown didn't qualify because her loans were commercial versus federal, so she didn't get any forgiveness. But there seems to be a little more nefarious, which we would have guessed, a little more nefarious operations at work in terms of them really pushing for making this lawsuit. So actually, if you go back, this is from shoot, I forget where this clip is from, but
have you heard?
I believe it's from
IAIWCC Pego moves the MP4.
Well, that's
you pulled it off Twitter, right?
I pulled it off Twitter, but I forgot the name of the organization. I think some of you might saw this, and I forgot to make it in my notes. But this is a clip that I saw on Twitter, and I know some people have played it, regarding, like what's really going on behind the scenes here in regards to these lawsuits. So if you want to go ahead and play it.
Heard about the corporate-backed right-wing network trying to sabotage your student debt relief at the Supreme Court? I didn't think so. The media's been all over President Biden's plan to eliminate up to $20,000 in student debt. But there's one critical piece they've left out of this coverage. Who's funding the lawsuit against it? Pull back the curtain and you'll see what's really going on here. The Supreme Court is hearing two cases that will decide the current fate of Biden's proposed student debt relief plan. One of those cases, Department of Education versus Brown, was ostensibly brought by a woman named Myra Brown from Texas. She argues that she's harmed by this debt relief plan because her privately funded student loans are not eligible to be eliminated. Ironically, she's already a beneficiary of debt cancellation. The government forgave her $48,000 Paycheck Protection Program business loan during the pandemic. But Myra Brown is just a patsy. The case was actually brought and funded by an extreme right-wing donor network, deceptively named the Job Creators Network. The group argues Biden's student loan cancellation plan should be struck down on the grounds that such relief represents government overreach and reckless government spending. Funny enough, that network is comprised of the same Trump-loving billionaires and corporations that were happy to be showered with the GOP's $1.9 trillion tax cut for the rich and countless corporate subsidies. The Job Creators Network even had their own debt canceled. Their $135,000 Paycheck Protection Program loan in 2020 was forgiven. The Job Creators Network passes itself off as just a bunch of entrepreneurs who care about small businesses. But let's take a look at who funds the group that is hell-bent on keeping you loaded with student debt, shall we? Let's start with Bernie Marcus, who organized the Job Creators Network.
So yeah, they're gonna name names. So name those names.
Yeah.
In 2010, and just so happens to also be the co-founder and former CEO of everyone's favorite small business, Home Depot. Marcus is worth a whopping $8.8 billion and has showered the Job Creators Network with $3.9 million over the past decade. Marcus has no shame in using his billions to try to buy elections for conservative and far-right politicians who serve corporate power. He spent $64 million backing the likes of Mitch McConnell, Ron DeSantis, and Donald Trump, among others. And Home Depot happily accepted over $94 million of government subsidies. Apparently he's pro-government spending when it comes to corporate subsidies, but canceling student debt for millions of borrowers across the country, that's a bridge too far. He recently said that no one wants to work because they're all too lazy, too fat, and too stupid.
Billionaire and Home Depot co-founder Bernie Marcus is blasting socialism, rightly so, for making things worse because socialism sucks.
But he's not the only extreme right-wing donor behind the effort. Meet everyone's favorite hedge fund family of white nationalists, the Mercers.
Pause it for a second.
Perhaps you've heard of the Mercer family.
You can listen to a former MTV VJ. So
well, yeah.
You can.
The Mercers are mega donors who were probably more responsible than anyone for making Steve Bannon a household name and getting Donald Trump elected in 2016. They're also part owners of Breitbart News, which it seems never met a white nationalist.
First of all, I blame World of Warcraft for Steve Bannon, actually.
Nationalists it didn't like. Rebecca Mercer runs a pro-Trump group called Making America Great. They splurged on trying to elect right-wingers and have given over $1 million to the Job Creators Network. Who else is part of this hodgepodge of government-hating billionaires who love government handouts? None other than the Koch brothers, the OG billionaire backers of the right. The Job Creators Network partners include the likes of FreedomWorks and the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, groups that the Koch donor network and its dark money empire has used in their ongoing corporate takeover of the US government. And that's not all. Those Ben Shapiro wannabes on campus with Turning Point USA,
there's no such thing as white privilege or racism, so.
Also a partner of the network. But it's not just individual far-right billionaires that are bankrolling the Job Creators Network. It's also big corporations themselves. The Retail Industry Leaders Association has given $4.6 million since 2012, and the National Restaurant Association threw in another $100,000. RELA and the NRA, yes, there's another NRA, are industry groups funded by corporations like Walmart, Home Depot, Dollar General, Starbucks, Olive Garden, Applebee's, and Disney. They've splurged millions upon millions of dollars lobbying to crush efforts to raise the minimum wage and expand union rights. They say they're against government spending, but what they're really against is government spending for working people. Take it from Melissa Byrne, who has been on the front lines fighting for student debt relief for years.
98% of the people who applied for debt relief come from zip codes making under $75,000 a year. 2/3 of the people come from zip codes making under $40,000 a year. So these are people who are struggling. These are people who, you know, if the loans turn back on, won't be able to make payments. Will have to, you know, maybe won't be able to make rent, won't be able to do other things, put groceries, pay for health insurance. And so this debt relief really helps make families whole.
The billionaire funders of the Job Creators Network also have friends on the very same Supreme Court that will be ruling on the group's lawsuit. Talk about overreach. One big donor to the Job Creators Network, Philip Anschutz, is a Colorado billionaire who backed the rise of Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Then there's the Federalist Society, which has overseen the corporate takeover of our federal courts, including the Supreme Court. The Koch brothers and the small business entrepreneur Bernie Marcus are among the Federalist Society's top donors. Supreme Court justices like Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Brett Kavanaugh are openly chummy with the Federalist Society and have earned major applause from speeches at its events. And now they'll be deciding on the Job Creators Network student loan lawsuit, brought to them by the same big donors that give to their pals at the Federalist Society. And finally, just stay in the matrix with me for one more second. A slew of billionaires, industry groups, and think tanks that are all part of the same corporate ecosystem that supports the mission of the Job Creators Network, from the Cato Institute and the Manhattan Institute to Betsy DeVos and the US Chamber of Commerce, are also stepping in to back the group's lawsuit aiming to crush student debt relief. They're submitting statements of support for the lawsuit to the Supreme Court, and the Cato Institute even has its own lawsuit against student debt relief. So let's do a little recap. The same billionaires and corporations that don't want you to have higher wages, that want to bust your unions, that don't want you to have decent and free medical care, that want to dictate what you do with your body, that want more tax cuts for the super rich, they're the ones that also want you to stay neck deep in student debt so that they can continue to profit and so that your life remains so precarious that you don't have a choice but to just shut up and accept the crumbs that they give you. That's who's backing this lawsuit. Not a small business group, a right-wing political behemoth who opposes anything that helps Americans stay afloat.
So that was from a more perfect union.
Okay.
So, I mean, nothing there is new. In terms of, like the right wing, like I
Yeah,
can't.
that was
it's
my
not
only
all-
like. It's not going to be all right wing stuff.
No,
It's going to be
and I'm actually going to play something to kind of
like they
at
throw
the beginning.
Disney in there too, right? Like
Yeah, like,
which
but
I wouldn't
again,
consider as right wing outright. They try to appear as
Right.
not.
Right. So, but so don't make any mistake. I want to take this clip, and I feel like a lot of it is correct, but I'm going to also kind of take it with a grain of salt because it's not just right wingers who are looking to shut this down. Like,
Yeah.
you also have to blame Biden for this as well. Who's kind of
Mhm.
who played into their hand essentially
Who gave them the
you-
play? Who we knew this
Right.
was going to happen, which we
Right.
talked about. Now, I mean,
Right.
they knew. They openly stated themselves that they knew. Like it's anyway, and now they're gonna blame right wingers completely and use it as a fucking election hammer.
Well, they already have,
Right.
like Elizabeth Warren already, and we played this at a few months ago.
Mhm.
Basically, was like, oh, it's those damn Republicans and it's those damn people in the, in these lower courts who are Republicans who were, like brought in by Trump who blocked it.
Wrong.
And again, she failed to say that Biden used the HEROES Act. They didn't say to use the HEROES Act. She wanted him to use the Higher Education Act, which would have been a little bit more universal. And would probably offer people more money if the progressives really pushed for it. But they limited themselves to just saying up to $50K.
Right.
Well, at least Warren was. I think some squad members, to their credit, pushed for full cancellation outright. So I will say that.
Okay. So you've got,
But I got one more clip. So those of you remember, like I mentioned this, I watched this, listened to this back in September. Like shortly after, Biden made the announcement, we're going to cancel student debt. And like, basically this was the podcast. I was like, fuck, we ain't going to get, back then I was even kind of like, I believe it when I see it. And then hearing this, I'm kind of like, shit, we ain't going to get shit, but I think he makes an important point. And I think, More Perfect Unions clip, like basically said this, but Jack Sugarman, who is actually a law professor from Fordham, when he was talking with Bree, made mention of this, which I think kind of overall sums up the whole fuckery of all of this. So if you want to play it.
Yes, sir.
I wasn't pessimistic when I wrote this piece because the subtitle was optimistic. There's time to fix it. There is time to fix it. But I guess if there's anyone out there who's working in the Department of Education, and you left your job somewhere, you left your job in some other education department in some state, or you left a job in the private sector because you wanted to get things done, but you weren't so worried about getting a couple more purple state Democrats into some districts in 2022. If you want to listen to how to actually get student debt relief done, take one more year, get it done through the Higher Education Act, and you have a shot at it winning.
So to be clear, the Higher Education Act would allow the full scope of the $10,000 to $20,000 and for everybody under 125, like the plan that Biden set out now?
I mean, honestly, there's nothing in it that requires means testing.
Or more. Or, yeah, like obviously I want the whole shebang. So that's another reason to want to pursue that route for those of us who are still holding out for full debt cancellation.
That's right. Brianna, I've got a lot of progressives wrote to me privately or said, there were a lot of progressives who were mad that I was saying this. Like I had some secret that, wait, you think that there isn't a conservative lawyer who already saw all this, but they don't want to write it in the Atlantic because they're holding on to it. The conservatives are probably mad that I'm suggesting the Higher Education Act, but progressives said, thank you.
Pause there.
Thank you for
So yeah, so Judge Sherman, I think, it kind of connects to what Perfect Moral Union said, because, obviously, the right doesn't want this to happen, and you kind of saw like the interests that, and I believe Savvy has said this, on her show before, like there's a lot of right wing interest, especially to keep people in debt.
But if you had waited a year, you could have rammed it down their throats and they couldn't have done anything about it. And
here's the thing, like if
they wouldn't
Biden,
have been able to remove it as easily.
Right. If Biden made the case to you, two things. If Biden didn't fucking wait till this past summer to make his move, if he did it back in 2021, as he should have done, because the reality is, like people were saying, what difference would it make? Yeah, it was going to go to court anyway, like regardless of what he did. But when you want to use the stronger case, knowing that there's going to be a lot of this corporate interests who are going to go against you, if you really cared, would you want to do something that was a little more airtight?
Right.
So yeah, as much as we can blame the right wing, we have to blame and Biden's a lawyer.
Yes,
he knew what
was
has
coming.
access to the top lawyers in the country. You didn't think that they didn't think that this was not going to get challenged? So why would you not
give me a little break here?
So why not use the best possible means to ensure your best chance of success? So, I mean, I didn't play this in this clip, but Jed basically said this comes off for the Democrats looking incompetent as fuck. Yeah. And then and it sucks that Warren and others were basically, covering for Biden, saying, oh, it's like the Republicans or whatever. Oh, it's like the right wingers and these judges or whatever. But Biden didn't even use the Higher Education Act, which Elizabeth Warren told him to use.
Right.
So,
and you ain't black.
So this is what he's saying here is like progressives, and I think this kind of shows how cowardly they are, basically secretly saying to him, thank you for sharing that, because he wrote an article about this in the Atlantic, which kind of exposed the idea that he should have used the Higher Education Act. And yeah, so even the fact that they were secretly saying thank you was just kind of like, really? You can call this out in public, to have people kind of be aware of truly what's going on.
Okay.
Right? But anyway, yeah, we can finish what Jed's saying here.
We're just reminding everyone that there is a statute that is about this. It's not, and it's about structural change. I mean, one other thing I'm worried about here is that it's the Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema votes that they're worried about, because they want to signal to Wall Street that we're not doing anything serious and broad here. This ticket is good for one pandemic ride and one pandemic ride only. Wall Street, don't worry, we're not coming after the structure here. And progressives say to me, thank you, because the Higher Education Act is what this is the act that allows us to take at least one step and more steps later towards fixing the problem of student debt in the country.
Right. So that's kind of so going back to what Ilhan said, this was the first step.
Right.
And because Biden basically, I can't even say fuck them over by using the HEROES Act, they're kind of stuck now. So if they're challenged and if it gets shut down, what are they going to do? So it just shows several things. Biden never wanted student loan debt forgiveness. I think that's very clear. He never wanted it. Number one. Two, it shows how cowardly the progressives are in not calling out the very thing that they said for Biden to do that he didn't do, which would have given them the best chance of success. And even if, like, let's say, if even that they had to fight for it and won, that could have made the case later to push for more later,
right,
to fully cancel the whole thing. So, and number three, it just shows, like, capitalism at work here in terms of, oh, we're just going to give you like a means tested thing. We don't want to give full cancellation to everybody. This is just a crumb,
Yep.
and like, you don't need to worry about Wall Street and like all these big corporations. We got your back. Like, this is just a one-time thing because of the pandemic. It's not going to happen again. So, as I said in another stream.
Yeah.
Don't be rude.
Don't be rude, Kid
If
Bear.
you are in debt or just any kind of debt, make plans now.
Yep.
Because, as I said, and I'm pretty sure that this is going to happen, the latter half of this year is going to be a shit show for a lot of people.